On behalf of GLODEM, I'd like to welcome you all to the first seminar of Spring 2020 of the AI and CSS seminar series. Today we have the great pleasure of hosting SDG AI Lab, and they will give us a talk on data science for SDGs. I'll start with a short bio of our speaker, Gökhan Dikmenar, who works as a technical specialist for UNDP Istanbul International Center for Private Sector in Development. His work focuses on generating ideas and guiding the center in transforming markets to integrate people and achieve sustainable development. He leads the center's initiatives on inclusive digital transformation and skills development, such as Skills for an Inclusive Future and SDG AI Lab. He is an economist and software engineer by training, and he has international advisory, policy formulation, and research experience on private sector engagement in development. His expertise and research interests include areas such as inclusive digital transformation, skills development, and frontier technologies such as AI, machine learning, and GIS for sustainable development. He holds an MA in International Relations from Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies and an MS in Software Engineering from Boğaziçi University. We will also have Dina Akilbekova with us, presenting together with Mr. Dikmenar. Without further ado, I give the floor to you. And I think you can, share your screen already.
Thank you. Is our screen visible to you? Okay.
Yes.
And this is our logo, and from the motto line, you can see that we are working on developing digital solutions for SDGs. And today we would like to first start with an introduction to sustainable development and SDGs, just to contextualize what we are doing. And we are very much immersed into SDGs, but time to time we feel like it will be good to remember again why these technologies are important in SDGs contexts. And then we will continue with explaining the role of these technologies in achieving the SDGs. And we will also share with you some ideas about how these technologies can be applied to sustainable development. Later, just to give you a little bit more insight about how actually these technologies can be practiced in development context, we will give examples about the activities of the lab, and we will also introduce the portfolio and the approach of the lab. And then we will have a Q&A session, but we are very much into having an interactive discussion. Anytime during the presentation, feel free to interrupt and ask your questions. We will also give some short breaks between the sections just to check if there is a question from your side. You can always type from chat, or you can follow the guidance of the moderator about sharing your questions, and we will accept the questions according to the guidance of the moderator. So I would like to start with a basic introduction to sustainable development. And one of the definitions we frequently came across, and we like, meeting the needs of present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So basically it is about a balanced approach. And sustainable development is a multidimensional concept. It covers peace, economic growth, social inclusion, and environmental protection. And you will see all these dimensions also in the SDGs. And it requires a balanced approach across all these dimensions. So we will not sacrificing one dimension for the sake of another. And we may continue with remembering the Millennium Development Goals. It was from 2000s, and there were 8 goals created by the United Nations to reduce poverty and in developing countries over a 15-year period. And there are fundamental differences between Sustainable Development Goals and the Millennium Development Goals. Just to contextualize the understanding, I will highlight those dimensions. First, the Millennium Development Goals are focusing basically the needs of the developing countries. And the second one is it was established through an expert panel, basically, or formulated by a group of experts and engagement of the countries. And when we also look at these goals, there are also focus, as we mentioned, the needs of the developing countries, basically excluding certain areas that are very much common in now our understanding of sustainable development. And when we look at the Sustainable Development Goals, it was established through a participatory process, and it was maybe the first time that we run a global process to establish the goals, and they are more ambitious. And when you look at the number of the goals, there are 8 MDGs, but there are 17 SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. And also it is covering some areas that are excluded in the MDGs. So in another way of saying it, they are more ambitious, and at the same time they are more comprehensive, and also they are covering a universal agenda, not an agenda for developing countries, but a universal agenda. So we will come back to this, and I will remind where these dimensions are important for the discussion. And we will go down into the details of the Sustainable Development Goals, and we will look at them layer by layer. Now we will look at the major groups, major pillars of sustainable development. There is the people dimension, prosperity, peace, partnership, and planet dimension. And the goals are actually structured under these 5 main pillars. And when we look at the goals, you will see that under the people dimension, there is the ending poverty, hunger in all forms, and ensure dignity and quality. Under the prosperity dimension, you see ensuring prosperous and fulfilling lives in harmony with nature. And there's the peace dimension, partnership, and the planet dimension. And when we look at the MDGs, as we mentioned, some of these dimensions were not visible. And in the period of time till 2030, these goals will guide the global development agenda. And because of that reason also it is named as 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And when we look at the details of the goals, we will see that there are 17 interconnected goals, and under those 17 goals, there are 169 targets. And you see the goals about poverty, hunger, health, education, gender equality, water, energy, work-life, industry, inequalities, urbanization, sustainable production and consumption, climate change, oceans, and biodiversity, peace and partnership. So these are the goals under those 5 pillars. And there are also indicators to track the progress on these goals. And this structure actually is something that we learned as an effective way of monitoring our progress during the Millennium Development Goals time. And now these 17 goals become the lingua franca of our development discussions. And I will just show you the structure of the goals. In here you see there is the goal as the major guiding objective, and under that we have the targets. For instance, for goal 1, ending poverty in all its forms everywhere, we have the eradication of extreme poverty by 2030, and we are following that with an indicator. And we also mentioned clearly what we are measuring under this target. And because it is becoming a common target for all the countries, now we are also accessing the data. We are able to access the data about these goals and targets. This is also an important dimension about quantifying our progress. And it is also important for a data-driven decision-making process. I think it's also important in that sense for your master's program. There will be more data about development in the future. As we mentioned, that the goals are universal, and not only for developing countries, but also for developed countries and countries of all levels. And you see here, for example, this is the Norway's voluntary report about about its progress on SDGs, and also you can see Turkey and Kenya. In addition to the countries submitting their voluntary national reviews, there are also communication about the sustainability initiatives of the companies. So basically, as we mentioned earlier, these goals actually unified our way of discussing development in many areas and in many forums. So even the companies are using SDGs to communicate their progress or contributions to sustainability. And just to recap the discussion, we would like to say again that it is not for countries, it is not for governments, it's for everyone, and it requires action from all of us, and it will change the way the world conduct business. And we are seeing this now actually through this climate-related discussions, and it has an implication on the finance industry, and the finance industry also changed the rules for the access of private sector to the financial resources. So it will impact many dimensions of our society, and we will not be sacrificing one goal for another. The goal, no goal is more important than the other, and we need to consider our impact on one goal while we are trying to achieve the other. And there will be a strong emphasis on climate change, and the global goals will address the climate change also. And one important dimension is inclusion, and it will leave, the goals will leave no one behind. So it will be for all people, young and old, and all countries, all small and big, and everyone will be considered by the goals, and they are hands-on, and in nature they are global. So now we covered the sustainable development goals quickly, and we also need to understand it is not an easy task to achieve these goals. First, there's a resource constraint. As we mentioned earlier, MDGs were more modest in terms of their ambition. SDGs are more ambitious. It is universal, and it is also covering more dimensions of development. So it will require large amount of resources. And one way of dealing with resource constraint is doing whatever we are doing in a more efficient way. And this will require also innovative ways to conduct our activities, and this will necessitate using all the possible technologies that will help us to achieve better and higher results. And there will be trade-offs. We also need to pay attention to this. When we are working on one SDG, there might be an impact on another one. Because of it is complex and interconnected nature, we also need to make sure that while we are advancing one goal, for instance, about accessing to water, we also shouldn't be harming a goal or harming a target related to biodiversity. And it will require also coordination because as we mentioned, it is for all of us, all stakeholders. And we also need to understand how we are progressing and what we are working on. We also need to make sure that there is some sort of an information flow between the stakeholders. And this is also another reason why data is very important, and processing the data from our activities is also very important. And the COVID-19 is our new challenge. Actually, we would like to also share with you that maybe for a long time, it is the first time we are seeing a deterioration in certain targets, and at the same time, it is bringing some new challenge about inclusion. We also observe that there is a decrease in resource flows to developing countries. So there will be an impact due to COVID-19 in the achievement of SDGs. So we also need to look for some innovative ways to close this gap. I would like to give a short pause for your possible questions or for your comments. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to share. Otherwise, we would like to continue with the role of frontier technologies in achieving the SDGs. So I guess I can continue. And we define these technologies as emerging innovative technologies. There is no, let's say, correct definition of these technologies. It is a way to describe, we use these terms, a way to describe these technologies, and we emphasize the innovative dimension of these technologies. It is changing the society, economy, environment, and other dimensions of our life. They are also named as fourth industrial revolution technologies. And we can see that these technologies, artificial intelligence, machine learning, geographic information systems, actually they are in a sense not new. For instance, artificial intelligence work is like 60 years old. Machine learning is roughly the same. Geographic information systems, if you don't take the digital version of geographic information systems, it is maybe 100 years old. Blockchain is the most recent one, and 3D printing is almost 40 to 50 years old technologies. But the issue is now with the advancement of communication and also a connection of these technologies with the fourth industrial revolution, they are creating a huge impact on our societies and economies and environment. So we would like to size these opportunities that are coming with these technologies, and also we would like to deploy them or utilize them for the achievement of SDGs. And this is a graphic actually from 2017. It was from ITU like 5 years ago, and they predicted, in a sense, these technologies can be used in this way or that way based on the existing applications. And we will cover now briefly that you will see all these technologies are now deployed and in action. These technologies are innovative and also offer solution to deal with the challenges associated with poverty, global warming, and others. And also these technologies, in addition to helping us achieving the SDGs, also offers an opportunity to developing countries to leapfrog. Basically, they can catch up with the development with using these technologies. I will just briefly give some examples. For example, with these technologies for eliminating poverty, we can map the poverty with predictive analysis. And for ending hunger, we can use these technologies to increase agriculture productivity. Now, I guess you are all familiar with the term precision agriculture. And with SDG, in relation to SDG 3, we can analyze a large amount of healthcare data. Now AI is deployed in digital health imaging sector vastly. And we have seen also during the COVID time in identifying the COVID cases with this digital images, digital health images. And also it can help us to revolutionize classrooms. And during the COVID time, we have seen that these technologies are deployed to change how we are teaching, how we are learning, And at the same time, AI-related tools were also implemented in relation to this learning process. And I will go a little bit quickly to some other SDGs. It can, in relation to, for instance, SDG 10, it can help build more inclusive societies through use of disability robotics. And you may have heard that with the 3D printers, for instance, now people can have prosthetics designed for them, customized for them. And we can also use these technologies to model climate change and predict disasters. And also we can use these technologies to understand discrimination in, for instance, job advertisements, and reduce this discrimination and corruption in the public procurement. So these technologies, as predicted, contributing to SDGs, and now they are deployed in many places. And this report, as I mentioned, from 2017, and many of these ideas actually are under implementation and contributing to the achievement of SDGs. Now, our challenge is finding new ways to deploy these technologies for sustainable development. Let's look at also from the technology dimension, and I will give some examples from UNDP practices, just to also underline again that these technologies are implemented and in use for SDGs. The first technology in focus is natural language processing. It is a combination of linguistic, computer science, and artificial intelligence. Usually it is used in combination, as a combination of these technologies, and it can be implemented for translation, chatbots, and text analysis. And I would like to also mention that for translation services, UN texts were mainly used in the early days of natural language processing and training this translation software. And UNDP utilized this in Georgia, for example, during the COVID time to disseminate information to MSMEs about the COVID-related changes in the services regulations. So it helped people to access information faster. And the second technology in focus is machine learning, and it is a subfield of AI, and it is about training machines with a vast number of examples. And by this way, we can also classify, or we can also provide solutions based on examples. And it is used in many ways, but it can be used also for prediction of natural hazards. And in Bosnia, for instance, UNDP uses it to predict floods, and also supporting local decision makers about how they can respond to the floods. And you might have seen also Google examples with TensorFlow in India, Bangladesh, and other countries. It is becoming a mainstream approach to predict these type of natural hazards. And GIS, it is, as we mentioned earlier, it is a pretty common technology, and it is about capturing, storing, manipulating, and analyzing geographic data. And some of the common fields of application is about understanding the impact of natural disasters and change in the geographies, and also understanding the human activities related to catastrophes and conflicts. And these application fields are mainly in our domain. And one example is from UNDP Pakistan, which the office is using this technology to predict or to estimate the earthquake consequences, and accordingly how many people will be affected, so they can plan their resources for such disasters. And one another example is the blockchain technology. It is also known as distributed ledger technology, and it is more famous with its implementation in the finance world, but it can be used also for other purposes. And UNDP Serbia is using blockchain to help people to send their remittances to their families, and it is decreasing the cost of transferring funds. And we also can see the advancement of this technology. Actually, it created so much attention to use of these technologies in our daily life. And when we look at all these technologies and opportunities, we also need to remember one more thing. It is the digital divide. And we would like to approach to this digital divide or gap in use of technologies from two perspectives. First, we would like to remind that we are talking about this fourth industrial revolution. There are countries which are experiencing just the second industrial revolution. They have limited access to electricity, and they are just accessing to electricity. And there are also countries that are experiencing third industrial revolution, and they are just having access to internet. And so with considering these limitations, we need to acknowledge that there is a significant divide between the developed and developing countries. And it is also affecting the utilization of these technologies and implementation. And this divide also coming with the requirements or lack of skills, lack of strong technical skills in implementation of these technologies. And when we look at the implementation of these technologies also in development sector, we see that because of all these reasons, we also see a lack in the implementation of these technologies. And we see most of the examples about the utilization of these technologies in the private sector, in the retail sector, but not in the development field. And this is something that we would like to change. We would like to bring these technologies more into development space. And we also need to consider the ethical dimension of the use of these technologies. You can see, or you can, I guess, follow the discussions about the bias, about the use in relation to use of these technologies. Even the software now we are using experienced a bias about removing the background and their algorithm, because trained on mainly Western people, they missed some people when they are removing the backgrounds. And we also need to be considered about data privacy, and also we need to follow the discussions of UNESCO about standardizing the efforts that are related to minimizing the biases and possible misuses. And how we see the way forward, these technologies are indispensable, and we need to utilize as much as possible in achieving the SDGs. And we would like to mainstream these technologies within the UN and also among the development stakeholders like NGOs, like government institutes, like other stakeholders. And we would like to also focus on the possible risks while we are implementing these technologies and trying to achieve excellence on these technologies. We also would like to watch and be considered about the regulations and ethical use of these technologies, and also transparent and inclusive way of using these technologies. So this is an introduction to the SDGs, how they can benefit from these technologies, and some implementation of these technologies in development space. Now, we would like to also check again for your possible questions. Otherwise, we would like to continue with how we are implementing these technologies in our lab.
And I will keep an eye on the chat box if you would like to ask any there to our audience. We have about 72 people in the room. That's really nice to see. So do let us know if you have any questions. I think everything's clear so far.
Okay. I would like to give floor to my colleague Dina, and she's our outreach and coordination specialist for the SDG AI lab, and she will explain the lab, its activities, and also give some examples from our work. Thank you. Over to Dina.
Hello everyone. Yeah, I will be introducing the lab and explaining some opportunities of collaboration with us, and also introduce some of our project portfolios. So SDG Lab, it's a joint initiative of UNDP BPPS teams, and we're hosted under UNDP CPSD. We're based in Istanbul, Turkey. However, SDG Lab, it's a global initiative. So we're supported by different UN initiatives and projects such as Swift Resilience, BCTA, and CBI. The lab has two main objectives. So the first one is to harness potential of frontier technologies such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, and GIS for sustainable development. And our second objective is to strengthen UNDP's internal capacity to respond to the increasing demand for digital solutions. We have three main areas of work: development, research, and advisory. We develop digital solutions for SDGs using AI, ML, and GIS. And we also conduct research in the promising areas of technologies and their application to development challenges and our clients. And lastly, we provide advisory services to UNDP units on research, development, and implementation of digital solutions. And we also facilitate their partnership with the private sector, specifically tech companies. So here you can see the snapshot of our projects. I don't want to take too much of your time, but I just would like to highlight that we have very diverse project portfolio. We have projects both using natural language processing, machine learning, GIS, and others. So I would like to highlight our partnership with Connecting Business Initiative, as we were using quite a variety of technologies there. First, we conducted research on mapping the use of technologies in disaster context with the emphasis on the private sector. And then we developed two prototypes using GIS and NLP technologies, and also we prepared two briefs covering the use of these specific technologies in disaster context. So here I would like to introduce our volunteer data scientist initiative. As in our work, we actively engage online volunteers, which is possible through our partnership with the UN volunteers. So we recruit online volunteers to our projects and we manage their work. So that's one of the ways to engage with our work directly. So for our collaboration with the volunteers, we use Agile framework for small research and development teams. So for daily communication, we use Teams and Slack. And for code review, we use GitHub group repository. And also we have established our own volunteer developer community. And for this communication, we use Slack. So here you can see more information about our data scientist initiative. So far we had 4 cohorts of online volunteer data scientists and received more than 1,000 applications. And each cohort will recruit between 10 to 20 volunteers depending on our needs. So far we recruited 106 online volunteers from 44 countries. And we also have 5 on-site volunteers coming from 4 countries who manage the workflow. So I myself a UN volunteer. So with the online volunteers, we have completed more than 10 successful digital projects, and our collaboration with the UN online volunteers has been recognized as one of the best practices within the UN volunteers. So also here you can see the examples of our collaboration with the volunteers. I would like to note here that most of our projects with the online volunteers are more exploratory in their nature. However, some of these projects, they also take off and develop into full-scale projects. For instance, SDG Classifier, it has started as a research project with the online volunteers. And later on, we collaborate with the external partner and actually developed a full-scale project based on that. So here you can see the profiles of some of our online volunteers. So they all come in from different countries and have very different background. However, most of them have master's degree or several years of experience working in the field. So if it's something interesting to you, feel free to contact us for these opportunities. As I mentioned, we use Agile framework in our work with engaging volunteers. However, I also would like to note that we use Scrum project management in our work. So basically we implement each project based on the needs of our clients. So we identify the needs and then we recruit online volunteers and we build our teams. And then in discussion with the representative of the client, we discuss what are the priorities for this project. And once we have this clear, we establish a plan how to achieve it. And then the project will be implemented in sprints. So basically we break down the project into into 4 sprints, or it depends on the length of the project. And basically the project will be implemented in those sprints. And then we deliver the project in the form of presentation, knowledge product, or document, or some prototype. So in our work, we actively collaborate with the different stakeholders, would it be UN entities, private sector, or non-profits. So we have collaborated with the UN entities such as BCTA, CBI, NC, UNDP, DRT, and others. And also actively collaborating with the private sector companies such as Google, Esri, Samsung, and others. And also lately we have been working quite a lot on research with the universities, both in Turkey and beyond. So we have been collaborating with Koç University, Millennium University, University of Hong Kong, and others. And also we have been working with the non-profits around the world. So one of the examples is our work with Turkish Wind, where we have been helping them to develop a digital solution to address one of their concerns. So here you can see some of our upcoming initiatives. So we have been working on building our own volunteer developer community, so we can engage our volunteers more effectively. And also we've been working on partnerships with the global tech leaders, and we host and organize training sessions on the frontier technologies for UNDP units and our partners. And we're also planning to expand our collaboration with the universities by conducting joint research and also establishing university chapters. And lastly, we also would like to establish our own fellowship program to engage more women data scientists in our work. So here you can see the list of our supporters and partners. So we support by UN Vertical Funds, Connecting Business Initiative, Business Call to Action, OCHA, PPMI, NDP Route to Resilience. Also have been lately collaborating with the Samsung, Middle East Technical University, Koç University, Bilkent University. Our main supporters are UN volunteers, UNDP ICPSD, and we're also very thankful to the governments of our fully funded volunteers, governments of China, Kazakhstan, South Korea, and Turkey. So here you can see our links to the socials, so feel free to join us. My colleagues will be posting the links in the chat box, so feel free to scan and tweet about the lab. So I think that's pretty much it about the lab, and if you have any questions, you can ask them now. Otherwise, I will proceed to the next section.
I think we can proceed to the next section. I don't see any questions in the chat box at the moment.
Okay, great. So I'll be briefly going through some of the digital products and projects we have been working on the lab, and all of them are directly connected to SDGs. So here's one of our examples that I mentioned, that we have been working with online volunteers, which expanded into the fully fledged project with external partner. And Gökhan has also mentioned that that reporting and also monitoring of SDGs is one of the challenges between the partners, as the information is coming from different sources and it's often coming in different formats. And it's making it really hard to monitor the progress on SDGs. And to address this issue, we collaborate with the Lithuanian Research Institute, PPMI, and we developed a digital tool, OSDG, which can analyze and classify any document, would it be academic article, report, or policy brief, or anything else, and it can classify it according to the SDG relevance. So, so basically, anyone can go online to the osdg.ai, and you can insert the paragraph of the text and see how this text relates to SDGs. One other thing that we have been working on under OSDG is the community data set. So with our partners, we have developed the OSDG community data set, which has more than 30,000 of labeled text with respect to 15 SDGs. This is a result of the work of online volunteers. We onboarded more than 1,500 online volunteers who helped us to develop this data set for almost 1 year. So this data set is updated and revisioned quarterly. So it can be used for academic research, hackathons, and others. It has been cited already a couple of times and has been used for several hackathons already. And we also plan to use it to improve our own machine learning model for OSDG. Here you can see our page on Zenodo, so you can also see the link. And if you want, you can go there and explore a bit more on the dataset. So here you can see a short demo of the OSDG. As I mentioned before, you can just insert the paragraph of the text, and the system will immediately give you which SDGs it's relevant to. So here's our next project on our NLP portfolio, CPE Document Analyzer. So this project is basically a country program documents knowledge base, which allows to store and identify hidden interlinkages between the projects of UNDP. So it would help our UNDP colleagues to basically identify the projects and how they link between each other. And as a final product of this project, we envision creating interactive knowledge graphs so our colleagues can go and check how the projects interlink between each other and basically improve the efficiency of their work. So here's one more project from our NLP portfolio. So we have been collaborating with the UNDP Nature, Climate and Energy team. So they have one of the largest UNDP portfolios with more than 600 projects, and they work all around the world. And they had a challenge on how to use all this information because they have been gathering quite a significant amount of text data. So to help them, we developed a tool which allows basically to get any information from the portfolio. On this short demo, you can see how we put the inquiry on climate change and receive back all the information and documents that we have on the climate change. And in the end, you can see even the world cloud. So here, basically, that's the same project. And basically to this tool, you can see that we can input the question, how to mitigate floods. And then the system will give us the answer depending on the project documents. So here you can see that it retrieves the answers from the project documents, and it highlights to us what can be basically be a response to our question. So as I mentioned before, we have collaborated with the Connecting Business Initiative, and one of the project has been related to NLP. And here you can see it's information retrieval for private sector engagement. So basically what we did, we mapped the private sector engagement in disaster risk management by analyzing more than 50,000 corporate social responsibility reports. And to visualize our findings, we used Power BI. Also, I mentioned before that we conduct trainings on the use of digital technologies for SDGs, and TS for SDGs, Data Science for SDGs course is our first product on that. So this product addresses the potential and use of frontier technologies for SDGs, and we cover technologies such as data science, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and others. So this course envisioned to be open source project and have been engaging online volunteers to contribute. So here's one of our more recent projects. It's Frontier Technology Radar for Disaster Risk Reduction, for DRR. It's an online tool which allows basically to monitor and track the existing digital solutions for disaster risk management. Rather than being just a database, it's an actually interactive tool which allows to filter the information according to the technology's disaster type or location. We created a data set, and basically we plan to update it regularly to have the most up-to-date information on this. And this product has been implemented in partnership with the UNDP DRT and CBI. So currently we're in the stage of finalizing the website, and hopefully we'll be launching it soon. So here's our project related to GIS, Digital Social Vulnerability Index. So this project actually combines both GIS and machine learning. So this tool allows us to automatically calculate social vulnerability to stresses such as climate change, natural disaster, and social shocks. This way actually allows to save lots of time and resources as it does it automatically, because before the experts had to calculate it manually. You can see that the results are presented on the interactive high-resolution map, which shows the vulnerability to the chosen hazards. And here's lastly another GIS project for our collaboration with CBI. It actually shows the private sector risk exposure map in the Philippines. So what we did, we collected the data and aggregated in one big data set on the location of MSMEs in Limeri province in the Philippines. And then what we did, we also calculated the private sector risk exposure to floods and other natural hazards. And this is made as an interactive tool, which can be easily accessed and used. So this project also has been implemented with CBI. So thank you so much, and please let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you so much for this really informative presentation, very inspirational for our students in particular who are in the CSS Masteries program. This actually happens to be their first seminar for their seminar course. So I will now open the floor for questions or comments. You can also, for those who would like to unmute themselves and ask, they can go ahead and do that. If not, you can put them in the chat box and I'll read them out loud. So Görkem is asking, can you share the links for the projects that you've enlisted in the slides? I think the projects are listed actually. The link you have at the very end, and the GitHub is actually listing those, Görkem. You can click there.
Yeah, we can also share some news items which cover more information with the projects, so no worries. Thank you for your interest.
Maybe our students from the CSS Masteries program can kick off the discussion session then, because this actually very much speaks to what they will be doing in their master's projects. Some of them are collaborating with the SDG AI lab. But we also have a question in the chat box, so let me start with that from Nezihe Fazilet. Could you talk a little bit more about the tools used in the AI lab, for instance, text mining on Python or the GIS package?
Maybe I can answer the question. As we mentioned earlier in our presentation, we are using the basic set of tools to facilitate our communication. And at the back of our communication, we have GitHub for code review and code repository. And we are mainly using or mostly using open source technologies, as you mentioned, the Python and its libraries for text mining. And I guess you are familiar with the tools related to natural language processing, NLTK and others. And time to time, we also use SPACY and sentiment analysis libraries. And for quick deployment of the results or to share our results, we are also using Power BI. And this allows us to convert easily to results to an accessible format by the teams, especially for our internal projects. We are also using this business analytics tools to visualize and to share our results. In terms of GIS, we are again using the Python libraries, but in addition to Python, because GIS is more visual, we are also using certain JavaScript libraries to deploy our solutions like Leaflet and others. So if you have any specific questions regarding the utilization of these tools, we can provide further explanation. But the best way of understanding the usage of these tools is working with them. And you may join to our volunteer developer community. Time to time, we advertise for projects and you can take a role in those projects. And you can actually practice these tools in a real project environment, real work environment. This is the reason why we are running this volunteer data scientist initiative. We are using it as an opportunity to cultivate the necessary skills that we will be using for sustainable development or achieving sustainable development goals. And
thank you very much. I'll read the other questions. The next one is from Işık Topçu. What are some tips for a social scientist who's starting out as a computational social scientist? I suppose you did a similar transition, Gökhan Hocam.
Yes, as you mentioned, I have an experience I can share. The first thing is we are working on a little bit more challenging field. We have less, let's say, examples to cultivate our skills, but there is the basics of this trait, and it can be learned from the traditional computational science sources, but deployment of these skills in social science and deployment of these skills in SDGs will require another level of effort, let me put it that way, because when you receive when you get your training, most probably you will be trained with the traditional data sets, and moving from these traditional data sets to the fields that you are interested in will require a good level of effort, and this may delay your let's say progress, but to be able to overcome that, we are working on a course together with Mary Hocam also about overcoming this challenge. It is the DS for SDGs course, and actually the discussions or the presentation from today will be also feeding that course, and we would like to increase the available materials about these technologies and their implementation on SDGs.
Thank you very much. I guess there was a question from Özge, because Yutingwen wrote, here's a link of our volunteer, Özge, who's leading the work on natural language processing and manages multiple volunteer data scientist teams. Her example is truly inspiring, and she's on her way to becoming a top field expert and role model. The link is given. Any other questions or comments, experiences you'd like to share with us? We, of course, are very excited to collaborate with SDG AI Lab on multiple occasions, one of which is the course that we are contributing to, will be developing together. And this once again happens to be the first lecture of that seminar. And we'll actually have a couple of more this term, and we're hoping to transform it into a course that can be listed as an elective for the CSS Master's program. That's what we are aiming to do. But since we just started our CSS program, we have just had our first cohort this year. We started out with the seminar structured course, but the aim is to actually transform it into a full-fledged course with towards the very end, a capstone project that students will prepare during the term, which will include computational social science methods like NLP, like GIS, as Gökhan and Dina had mentioned. And we also have more information coming on the chat box on the volunteer developer community that you can join. I very much recommend checking that out and joining the volunteers. We do have a lot of students I can see taking my international development class in particular, and they spent an entire term listening to SDGs, issues related to SDGs. So this might interest to them. So I invite them all to check that out. Any questions? Once again, I'm turning to our CSS master students because this is actually, again, intended as their first lecture for their seminar course. And so anyone apart from Ishik to like to ask a question, please don't hesitate. Of course, the floor is open to all of our participants who are joining us today. We decided to organize it as an open seminar to not only to the CSS master's program, but also to Koç University students and anyone basically registering for the event. But the next lectures will actually be intended for our CSS master's students. So bearing that in mind, let me see. We have further information in the chat box. Again, for those of you who are interested in joining the OSDG community, you have the related document, the related links, and information on the demo day. Chris Hojam is also with us, who is giving our GIS course in the CSS Master's programs. Thanking you very much. Any other questions? I think the presentation was really informative and very comprehensive in that it already answered a lot of questions that our participants had in mind. But if we don't see other questions at the moment, okay, we have another question from Ishik again. Which programming languages other than Python and R recommend for a new starter? For a new starter who's interested in, I guess, doing computational social science.
Python is the most, how can I say, most preferred language in this field. And even it is advancing against R, even in statistics field, and especially for deep learning and machine learning, I guess it is a must. But there are also recommendations from Deniz Hocam and others about using Julia for a faster, let's say, implementation of your ideas. And I feel like it is also gaining popularity. You also need to keep an eye on JavaScript, especially if you want to have a good visualization, good demonstration of your results. And I remember also a saying, anything that can be implemented with JavaScript will be implemented with JavaScript eventually. So you may have heard about TensorFlow implementation in JavaScript. So Python is the current currency of this trade, but if you want to advance or enrich your results, JavaScript would be good to also learn. And for more academic and performance-related concerns, you may also check Julia.
Thank you so much. So as you know, Ishik is a researcher in our lab. We have another researcher in our lab, Aybüke Şahinoğlu, is asking a question, who also happens to be consecutively has been selected the best annotator of the month for our project. So she's thanking you very much for the informative session. The reliability, transparency, and the quality of data are very important for the success of these technologies, and many countries experience problems in these areas. I'd like to know whether this situation poses any problems for the projects, and if so, how they can be tackled.
I think this is a general problem of this field, and there are some like basic procedures that we are following in our implementation of our projects, and exploratory data analysis is a must in your projects to check the quality of your data, and there are certain procedures that you can follow. And at the same time, time to time, you may find that your data may not be formatted in the best way to make your calculations or to communicate your results. You may also use some statistical techniques to transform your data. But beyond that, we always need to be considered about the comprehensiveness of the data about our purposes. And we mentioned the possible biases coming from the data that we are using and training our machines. And the machine learning algorithms are basically very much dependent on the examples that we are training them. And we need to keep an eye on them. And when we compare with this software engineering practices, we don't have yet a good mechanism to overcome all these risks, but we need to keep an eye on them, and we need to follow the discussions where the failures may come from. And at the same time, I believe that these discussions will lead to some standardized approach, like the unit tests in the software engineering or testing practices of the software engineering. Till then, we need to follow the discussions and keep an eye on for possible common risks.
Thank you very much. Maybe building on this and using my moderator privilege, I would like to ask you a question, because you work with both sides of this. I mean, in interdisciplinary work, bringing together from different disciplines is sometimes a little tricky. Could you tell us a little bit about what kind of issues you face every now and then, bringing social scientists and software engineers together, the different perspectives they have on SDGs and how methods can be applied to them?
Thank you. Actually, this question is very much relevant to our practice. As we mentioned in our presentation, we are following a multidisciplinary approach, and we are trying to bring together data scientists with UNDP experts. And UNDP experts, as you highlighted, mainly coming from the social domains, and they are not very much aware of the practices of software industry. But at the same time, we need to bridge these two different domains to be able to help them utilize these technologies. So in our case, it should be a totally multidisciplinary approach. And when we look at the difficulties on the software or data scientist side, they may not have the necessary information to make data and the results meaningful. And the social scientists usually have a better understanding about the data and where these insights can be located in the data sets. And we are first having this structured process, which is the combination of CRISP DM and the Scrum methodology. So we are establishing these multidisciplinary teams. Basically, we are making our social scientists part of the team, part of the effort. And this will, in a sense, a way to communicate the software engineering etiquette, let's say, or the software engineering practices, how we need to rule the discussions between these different group of stakeholders. And when we look at also to data scientists, and we also observe a gap between the software engineering practices and the data science practices. Usually, data scientists are mainly focusing on getting the results. Basically, we work with the notebooks and try to implement our ideas as fast as possible, but we usually don't pay attention to the good practices of software engineering, like testing our code and bringing also the control mechanisms, or also in the deployment process, utilizing the good practices and the best practices of the software engineering industry. So there are actually three types of people, or three groups of people in this business. Social scientists, data scientists, and software engineers. And all need to learn from each other. And we, as I mentioned, we are trying to cultivate this relationship between them through a structured process. And in many cases, it is also appreciated by UNDP practitioners, and they highlight that usually innovation comes when these two or three groups come together. And a data scientist usually can make some conclusions, but with the involvement of social scientists, they can make more insightful conclusions. And another dimension, I think we also need to consider the nature of the tools that we are using, like machine learning. It is more about coming from the example side rather than the theory side, because algorithmic programming is more close to theory-based approach, and the machine learning is more close to example-based approach. And social scientists can complement the gaps in the examples and can highlight if there is an unexpected situation as a result of our process, and help us identify those gaps. I hope this sufficiently answers the question.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm checking our chat box. Well, I think once again, your presentation was really informative. I think it already actually was very clear for the audience that they didn't ask any particular questions about the presentation itself, but we're also open to questions if you have anything to ask about the lab itself, or if you'd like to contact, of course, SDG AI Lab later, you can do that via the links provided in the chat box. I don't see any other questions in the chat box at the moment, but I also would like to maybe ask one more question about what your suggestions would be to, because we have mostly students in this session today, although we also have other guests I noticed from other institutions. We're happy to have them here too, but the majority of our audience is students today. So did you have any suggestions for students who are interested in conducting work on SDGs, applying methods? Are there any particular topics that you believe they should pursue and for their further studies maybe?
Number one thing that I can say, that this lab was established to cultivate those skills. As you mentioned, that this is a multidisciplinary approach, and we are trying to bring these two domains together under the lab: SDGs, development, or the social dimension, with the technology. So this is one of the unique places, one of the rare places that they can practice their skills and implement their ideas. And one dimension of the work that I I need to highlight, it is always a teamwork. And coding, the solution development is part of the work. It is important, and for their individual satisfaction, their let's say mastery, it is important. But at the end of the day, this is a social work, and you need to work as a part of the team, and you need to practice your team skills. And again, for that purpose, I recommend being part of the lab as a volunteer and work. And the other dimension is this is very practical, but it is inspired from a session that we had internally today. There are some tools of trade that are very common in the software industry, and you most probably will be expected to use those tools in addition to your coding skills, in addition to your other skills. So you may also spend some time on those practical skills, and you can find like courses or student development programs, even at top-notch universities like MIT. MIT has a course about these tools and practices. It's called Missing Semester. And there is another effort about cultivating those skills related to software development. It's called software carpentry. So there are many let's say initiatives to develop those skills while you are learning. Even if you are a computer scientist, you will need those skills, and most of them will not be available to you during your studies. So there are some practical skills that you also need to cultivate. And as I mentioned earlier, this is something that you also need to practice every day. You need to understand that this is a challenging field, and whatever you use will not be around in the next 5 years. So every day you need to learn something new and practice something new. Otherwise, you will be outdated, or you will not be able to contribute to your team effectively. So regular practice should be part of your day, and you need to find some projects that will allow you to learn and practice new skills. And that's why also we need communities. We need to engage with communities. And I think these are some practical recommendations, but it is all related to practice.
Thank you so much. We are actually approaching the end of the seminar. We usually try to spare an hour and 15 minutes. So if you have any questions to our audience, please don't hesitate to reach out after the seminar. But I think with that, we can conclude. And once again, on behalf of GLODEM, I'd like to thank you so much for this really informative and really inspirational presentation. We'll have the AI and CSS seminar series continuing with other seminars in the upcoming weeks. We'll keep you posted, but until then, we wish you all a great weekend ahead and hope to see you very soon.